So in this video, I'm going to show you how to create an absolutely stunning landscape photograph. Now, in no other genre is it actually more important to really utilize all the power potential that we have with Lightroom Mobile in our editing than landscape photography. This truly is one of the hardest things that we can capture with the camera because of the extreme dynamic range. We have very bright highlights, we often have very dark shadows, and it's quite difficult both for the camera to capture, but also for us to edit it. So take a look at this example photo, for instance. Look at the before and then look at the after. It is a massive impact, right? So what I'm gonna do in this video is show you all the different ways that I use Lightroom Mobile to unlock the full potential of my landscape photos, to recover that highlight detail, to recover that shadow detail, to add a little warm glow to the sun, to bring out all of the finer details in the photo and work on the contrast. And it happens in a very specific way, and that's exactly what we're going to cover in this video. So let's get started editing this photo. The first thing I want to do is start in my Light tab. So I'm going to click on my Light tab. I'm actually going to do something that seems counterintuitive at the moment. That sky is so bright, I get it. But first, I'm going to take my exposure slider. I actually want to increase a little bit of the brightness there because the shadow detail is also important. So I'm just going to bring this up a little bit, not that much, maybe to around plus 0.4, 0.5, something around there. I think that will do it. The next thing we need to do is clearly recover that highlight detail. So what I'm going to do is grab my highlight slider, and I'm just going to drag that all the way down to the bottom. And look at all that detail that I brought back. Next up, we have our shadows. I'm going to grab my shadow slider, and I'm going to drag that to the right. And I'm going to go quite far here. Let's go to about 60, maybe a little bit higher. Let's go to about 65. There we go. Now we're really bringing in that detail. Next up is our whites. I'm going to grab my white slider. I'm just going to drag this up a little bit, maybe around 15 or so. And then lastly, I have my blacks. I'm going to grab my black slider, I'm going to drag that down just to give me a little bit more contrast in the scene to, let's say, around 15 or so. There we go. So here we have our before and we have our after, just with that one tab. So next up, we're going to adjust color. I'm going to click on the color tab here, and because it's a landscape, I will typically make it a little bit warmer, especially when it's around sunrise or sunset. So let's grab the temperature slider, and let's drag that to the right, maybe around 7100, something around there. That's looking pretty good. Next, we'll grab our tint slider, and I am gonna increase the tint a little bit because I do see that there's a little bit of a green cast to this, and that kind of makes sense, right? There's a lot of green on this landscape here. We want to offset that a little bit, so maybe a tint of around 15 I think is going to do it. Next up, we have our vibrance. Let's add just a little bit more punch to the photo, a little bit more vibrance. I think around 15 is good. I know it's a sunrise or a sunset, so I want to add color into just the highlights to give us more of that warm feeling to it. So we're going to drag back up here to the top of our color tab, click on grading. We've done this before. I'm going to click on that highlights wheel. I'm going to scroll up a little bit until I see hue. I'm going to drag that to my favorite number here, 40. I'm going to grab my saturation and just drag that to the right until I'm happy. And look what that does. Let's go quite far here. Somewhere around 60. I think that works pretty well. Now we're going to scroll back up to the top. We're going to click done. So now that we covered the light and we covered the color, we also want to cover the details, right? We want to cover the contrast and the details here too. Those are logically the next few panels. So let's just do that now. Let's go ahead and click on the effects tab. I'm going to go to my clarity slider here, and I don't want to increase it. I want to actually decrease it because I want to get that soft feel. Now this is very, very subtle here, but it will make a big difference. If I zoom in quite a bit and I reduce that clarity, you're going to see it just softens up the image ever so slightly. And that's exactly what we want to do. I want to get that ethereal kind of feel to it. So the last adjustment we want to make from a global perspective is the details tab. So let's go ahead and tap that. And here's where I would add a little bit of sharpening, but because it's a raw image, we already have a little bit of default sharpening applied here. I don't want to sharpen the whole image. There's no point in sharpening the sky. It's just gonna sharpen any noise that may be there. I just want to sharpen the edges or the details of the photo. Let's apply a mask. And in order to do that, just like we did before, I'm going to grab that masking slider. I'm going to start dragging it to the right. And when I do, I'm going to tap on the screen again with my left thumb. And this way I can just see the mask take shape. I basically just want to remove the sky from the adjustment so it doesn't get sharpened with the rest of the photo. So now we have our global adjustments dialed in. Let's really bring this image to life. Let's head into our local adjustments. Now the first thing we want to do is select the sky, and that's really easy to do. On the bottom here, I'm just going to drag until I see that masking icon. I'm going to hit that plus button. And I'm just gonna click Select Sky. So what do we wanna do to the sky here? Now, if I click on color, I'm gonna grab my temperature slider, and I'm gonna drag this down a little bit. And here's why. I want to create a little bit of a color gradient in the image. I know it's warm towards the horizon because this is a rising sun type of photo. So by decreasing the color temperature here, I'm adding a little bit more blue to the sky, to the top of the image, and that's going to contrast well with the global adjustment that I made the whole image warmer. So between the top and the bottom of the image, we have a nice color contrast. Somewhere around maybe, let's say 20 or 25. I think that's gonna be pretty good. Now, next up, I'm gonna grab my tint slider. I'm just gonna add just a little bit more magenta to the sky. I just like the effect that it has, especially if it's a landscape image around sunrise or sunset. That looks pretty good. I don't wanna make extreme adjustments here. We do have to be careful about this. If we just isolate the sky, make a very specific adjustment, we can sometimes get grading or banding of the photo. We're gonna have a very defined edge. So I push this as much as we need to here, but I do want to isolate the sky one more time, but in a slightly more subtle way. So I'm gonna click on that masking icon. I'm gonna click on that plus icon. Now I'm gonna choose a linear gradient and just select the whole top half of the image. So what that does is give me a softer version of the adjustments and lets it kind of fade into the photo, giving me a nice feathering effect in the process. I'm gonna drag down from the top of the image, and remember, the more I drag, the softer that transition is. So I'm gonna get a nice soft transition here, something maybe around here. So what I wanna do here is click on my lights and grab my highlights slider here and just drag this down a little bit. I just wanna recover a little bit more information in the sky and bring it into the fold of the rest of the image's exposure. Now, the last thing I wanna do is add a little bit of warmth to the photo. Now, why would I do that? I just cooled off the sky. If I click on color, grab my temperature slider and drag this to the right, it's gonna warm up that horizon, but it's also gonna blend that warmth into the foreground towards the middle of the picture as well. So we're starting to just blend this in a really natural and realistic way. And when I'm done, I'm gonna go ahead and click that checkbox on the bottom right. So while we already have a beautiful image here, and this is where most people will stop, this is really where we're gonna take this to the next level. By introducing light, by introducing a little bit of sun, we're gonna break up that light and give us a more dynamic photo in the process. So let's get started. I'm gonna click on that masking icon on the bottom left. I'm gonna click on that plus icon on the right-hand side. I'm gonna choose a radial gradient here. So now I need to decide, where do I want that sun to be? Where do I want that spotlight to be? And if you look on the right-hand side, right where that mountain meets the background mountains, we have a little bit more light in that area. So I'm just gonna click on that spot and drag out. Just something maybe around here. And I'm gonna move this over and just make sure this blue dot is roughly around where that naturally occurring light source would have been. All right, let's double click to zoom that back out here. If I click on that feather icon all the way on the left at the top, you'll notice it's feathered roughly by 50%. Now this might be different for your screen, but what I wanna do is actually drag this all the way up to the top so we have a nice soft feather. And what that will do is give us a nice gradual transition with the adjustments we make, so it'll blend a little bit more naturally into the final photo. So having that feather adjusted the way we like, let's go ahead and make some targeted adjustments. So I'm gonna click on the light tab here. I'm gonna go right into my whites. I'm gonna drag that slider to the right, just a touch. All right, let me zoom in so you can really see what I'm talking about here. Now the next thing we wanna do is add some warmth, right? Because that's exactly what would happen if that sun was rising and hitting that landscape. So I'm gonna click on color here, grab my temperature slider, and I'm gonna drag this to the right a little bit. Somewhere around maybe 30 is good. Next, I'm gonna go to my effects tab. I'm gonna find my clarity slider, and I'm gonna reduce the clarity. I'm gonna go quite far here, maybe around -40 or so. That's what would naturally happen if the sun was flaring into the lens. Now the next step is something that I don't really see people do, but this is really what sells the effect. We're gonna find our dehaze slider and we're gonna drag that to the left and watch what happens to not just the sky, but more importantly, the rocks on the mountain and that whole landscape in the background here. That to me is really looking realistic. It's actually looking like there was a light source there that's bleeding into the frame and bleeding into our lens. It's that dehaze that makes such a big difference here. If you find that that sky starts to lose a little detail as you make the whole thing brighter, what you can do is go back to your light slider and you can go to your highlights and you can just recover that information in the highlights. It's very subtle, right? Because what we could do is go back up to exposure and really increase this effect. But if it starts to bleed out into the sky and just reduce the highlight detail, we can come over here to highlights and then in turn just recover some of those highlights. So that's already looking really nice. Let's take a look at the before and the after of that adjustment right there. So now that we have that adjustment for the sun, that really does make such a big difference in this photo, I'm gonna click the checkbox on the bottom right, and now let's add some even more dynamic light to this photo. This is really what makes our images shine, especially when we're talking about landscapes. I'm gonna go ahead and click on the masking again on the bottom left. I'm gonna create a new mask by clicking that plus icon on the right-hand side. And now this time I'm gonna create a radial gradient, but I'm gonna use it in a very different way. I wanna simulate the effect of the sun hitting this landscape now. This is gonna make such a big difference here. So we need to get a little creative. Where would the sun that we already created on the right-hand side of the frame, where would it hit in the landscape? So what I'm gonna do is just gonna draw a radial gradient, maybe somewhere around here. I'm gonna click on my feather. Let's make sure that that's feathered quite well. We can back it off just a little bit if we want to. So now what we wanna do is brighten up those areas and also warm them up as if the sun was hitting that spot. So let's do that. We're gonna click on the light tab. I'm gonna find my whites just like we did before. And this time I'm gonna drag them quite a bit, right? Maybe around 50 or so. All right, now I'm gonna pinch to zoom in just so you can see what I'm doing here. And let's make this area maybe just a little bit larger. There we go, so we can really see what's going on. Next up, we have our color. I'm gonna click on color, I'm gonna drag that to the right. Let's make that a bit warmer. Let's do around 35, I think that's looking pretty good. And every time I include a little bit of warmth, I also do adjust the tint just a little bit. So we're gonna increase the tint. We'll maybe do around 20 or so. Let's do 22. So next up, I'm gonna open up my effects tab here. I'm just gonna go ahead and grab that clarity slider and move it to the right. And watch what happens when I do. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. You're gonna see it's gonna start getting a little bit brighter as well as adding some more detail in there. So let's go quite a bit. Let's go around 20 or so. And then lastly, I'm gonna add dehaze, but I'm gonna add it in a negative way. I'm gonna remove the dehaze. And what that's gonna do is brighten up that area even more, just like I did when we were simulating the sun. So around -10 or so, that's all we need, just a little bit. All right, now we want to duplicate this effect because I want this effect to hit the landscape in multiple places. So just like we did earlier, I'm going to tap and hold on this adjustment, and I'm going to click duplicate. Now I'm going to grab that and just move it to the left-hand side of the frame here. Let's drag this over. And I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Something around there looks pretty good. Drag that over. And I'm going to tap and hold one more time. I'm going to duplicate this one. I'm going to drag this up over here. Let's zoom in a little bit. And let's pick a spot that looks quite nice. I'll reshape this and maybe somewhere right around here. There we go. I think that's gonna look really good. So now I'm gonna double click to zoom back out. So take a look at these adjustments now. Here's my before and this is our after. And you're gonna notice that light that's starting to hit that scene in a very specific way. We're targeting and we're directing the light. And when we're doing that, we're making it more dynamic in the process. Now there's one last thing I think that we can add that can really even make this image shine a little bit more. And that's to create the effect of a sun ray. So let me show you exactly what I do in this scenario. I'm gonna click on that checkbox. I'm gonna click on the masking on the bottom left, click on the plus icon on the right-hand side there, and then I'm gonna click on my brush tool. There's a couple of things that you should pay attention to as far as the brush settings go. So what I'm gonna do is open up this panel on the left-hand side by dragging this bar from left to right. Now the size is pretty good. We can keep the size where it is. Somewhere around 20 or 30 is gonna work just fine. Now the feather though, I am gonna bring this down. Let's bring it down to around 50 or so. I do want a slightly hard edge because I want a little bit more definition in the brush strokes here. Now the last step is make sure that you have a very, very low opacity or a low flow to the brush adjustment. What that's gonna do is let us build the brush adjustments on top of each other and really dial in the final effect that we're looking for here. Okay, so now that we have our settings kind of loaded up, we're gonna completely remove that menu on the left-hand side so we can really see what we're doing. And I'm just gonna create one brush stroke. And I'm gonna start from my light source here, and I'm gonna work our way outward because we wanna simulate the effect of a light ray. So I'm just gonna brush a couple more here. I'll start from my light source and drag, start from my light source and drag. Now, before I go any further, let me just bring in some adjustments so we can actually see what we're doing. Let's click on light. I'm gonna add just a little bit of exposure. I think around 0.15 is good, just a little bit. Now we're gonna click on color, and I'm gonna add a little bit of warmth to this. So I'm gonna drag the temperature to the right. I think around 25 is gonna be good. And then lastly, we're gonna add a negative dehaze. Just like we did with the sun, we're simulating that sun ray, so we want a negative dehaze. So I'm gonna click on effects. I'm gonna grab that dehaze slider and just drag it to the left a little bit, adding some negative dehaze to the photo. Now right now it's a very subtle effect, but that's the point. We want to build this up. So what we're gonna do now is first I'm gonna click off of my mask. You see that icon on the top right hand side? I'm gonna turn that mask off so you can really see what we're doing. And now I'm just gonna brush, and I'm gonna start brushing. And again, this doesn't seem like it's doing much because we have such a low opacity, but take a look when I press and hold on that masking now. There's my before, and that's my after. It's something that you wouldn't notice was done until you removed it, and that's exactly the kind of subtlety that we're looking for here. Let's see how all of this comes together in the end. I'm gonna click on that checkbox on the bottom right. I'm gonna tap and hold on the before, and then let go, and there's my after. This is how you edit a landscape photo. You start with a beautiful scene, and you have a high dynamic range image like we have here. A raw file will help quite a bit to allow you to recover those highlights and also recover those shadows. By adding masking and utilizing all the tools available to us in Lightroom Mobile, we can quite literally bring this image to life by adding light where we want it to be. And so hopefully you'll be able to take what you learned in this lesson and add that sense of dynamic light and beauty to your photos as well. This video was a free preview of the iPhone Editing Academy online course. In this course, you'll discover everything you need to know to edit your photos to perfection using the device that's always in your pocket. Whether you want to breathe new life into your old images or make your best photos even better, you'll find out exactly how to do that on your iPhone. I'll show you the latest photo editing tricks that will transform even average photos into stunning masterpieces in just a few minutes. So if you'd like to learn more about creating incredible photo edits on your iPhone, please take a look at the full version of my iPhone Editing Academy course. You'll find the link in the description right next to this video. So click on that link now and I'll see you inside the full version of this course.